Hello and welcome to Colonial Outcasts, a podcast where we offer political and military commentary and analysis from an anti-imperialist perspective that will make your uncle increasingly angry and uncomfortable. Today we will be talking about the Israel-Hezbollah state of play following the instantly infamous pager attacks last Tuesday and the targeted assassination of senior Hezbollah Radwan Force commanders this weekend. Does it change the security situation in the north? Will it escalate? One thing seems certain. As the U.S. election nears, the Biden administration is clearly paralyzed in the face of Israeli-Hezbollah escalation. So this is a semi-regular operational breakdown episode, and thus we are joined by myself, Greg Stoker, and series regular Travis, a former field-grade West Point artillery officer, amongst other things. What's up, man? Ready to dive into some insanity?
Yeah, how you doing, dude? Let's send it.
All right, gonna send it. Oh, speaking of sending it, we're also gonna talk about some crazy ordinance and get into detail about some crazy ordinance that Israel is dropping in southern Lebanon. I've been getting mentioned in it all throughout social media, being like, what is this? What is this? Well, we're gonna talk about what this massive explosion actually is that we're seeing happen in southern Lebanon on this episode. So stay tuned for that. But before we do, we are on Patreon. We've got exclusive content over there to include live Q&As, early interview access, and comedic video series every Friday to ease the horrors that happen every weekend in international affairs. Check out, if interested, link in description. Okay, so my basic premise for this episode is first, what is the overall strategic situation in Palestine, Lebanon? On one hand, just like Gaza, Israel is spiraling into war in Lebanon without a strategy or clear goals. And even if they wanted to invade, I am pretty convinced that they can't. Second, the U.S. faces a strategic dilemma as Israel escalates attacks on Hezbollah, risking broader conflict, while Washington seeks to prevent war. It's constrained by limited policy options, political timing, and Netanyahu's brinksmanship. In short, this madness won't end anytime soon, but I don't see it getting out of control just yet. Travis, you and I have been saying this since like mid-October. Despite the pager attack, and the high-level eliminations, do you see the overall strategic situation as having changed? Shall an open war finally happen?
Not at all. I mean, fundamentally, I just think the IOF still don't want the smoke, really. They're willing to drop ordnance, they're willing to carry out pager attacks, but they're not willing to cross the border and slug it out on the ground. I don't think they've got anything anywhere close to that.
And one thing I would say, there's a massive media push saying, oh, Hezbollah's command and control and their leadership has been completely degraded. Their hierarchy is in shambles. But then again, just like Hamas, Hezbollah is able to function without a strict hierarchy and networks and cells compatible with independent action as well.
Yeah, it's almost like those organizations were designed and evolved to grow in a way where you can't kill them by killing one single leader in a drone strike. You know what I mean? It's almost like they've been dealing with that for 2 decades. So
Almost. So just to give, because I know some people in the audience still aren't up to date with what's happening, what's going on right now. So we're just going to take this for the next 8 minutes to establish the chronology of these Israeli operations and where things stand right now. So we are going to begin with, that was premature. We are going to begin with the pager attacks themselves, do a couple minutes of commentary, then talk about these strikes, and then go forward from there.
We finally have some answers on how Israel managed to rig and detonate thousands of Hezbollah pagers in Lebanon and Syria.
Sorry about this guy's narration voice. It is distinctly odd.
Just months ago, Hezbollah, a regional militant group funded by Iran, relied heavily on cell phones for communication. But concerns grew over Israel potentially hacking into their mobile networks. To counter this, Hezbollah switched to what looked like a more secure option, ordering thousands of old-fashioned pagers to serve as their primary means of communication. However, according to a recent report by the New York Times, Israel intercepted the shipment before it reached Hezbollah. In a covert operation, addition, Israeli forces reportedly concealed 2 ounces of explosive material next to the batteries of up to 5,000 pagers. These devices were also rigged with a remote switch that could trigger the explosives. After these steps were complete, the pagers were distributed to Hezbollah members as intended. At 3:30 p.m. local time on September 17th, Hezbollah fighters received a message seemingly from their leadership. After a brief pause, long enough for the fighters to pull out their pagers and bring them closer to their face, the devices detonated, killing 12 and injuring more than 3,000 people. And if that wasn't crazy enough, the following day, hundreds of Hezbollah walkie-talkies also exploded, suggesting that Israel also managed to rig those devices.
All right, so first of all, I would like to bring up, this is typical of Israel, these like really flashy operations that don't really net like any strategic gains, but they do allow for a heavy information operations and propaganda push. So what we've been seeing over the past week is like, this is the biggest intelligence coup of the century, like the 21st century. This is like the most like par excellence operation ever done. It's like James Bond. It's like, no, it's not really like James Bond if you pay attention to James Bond. It's more like James Bond villain.
Yeah,
I would
very
say.
much so.
A lot of these attacks were they detonated all of these devices without having any command and control, without having any accountability of where they are, who's holding it. Children died. It was kind of like an indiscriminate attack, and yeah, we're kind of, if this was anybody else, if Hezbollah were to perpetrate this attack, we would be calling it a terrorist attack. So I think before we get into it, some of the pagers were intercepted. We don't need to get into the details of how that happened, how that potentially happened, the companies involved. There's Golden Apollo. There is a Hungarian BAC company who was supposed to be the distributor. It looks like a front. There's a lot of stuff that we won't know for some amount of time. What we do know is that Petn, P-E-T-N, which is a highly unstable explosive compound, was put on the batteries. Petn can be detonated through an electrical charge, through a spark, through heat, and it seems like they managed to rig up a contraption in thousands of pager devices to detonate them almost simultaneously. Now, the second day, they were at funerals for the first round of people who were killed. And at the funerals, there was like civilians, and the walkie-talkie explosions, which came from a different supply chain of ICOM radios. We don't really know too much about them, but a larger explosive could have been planted in the batteries of the walkie-talkie. So the walkie-talkie explosions were more devastating. It comes from a Japanese company. The Japanese company is investigating where these radios came from. They are not happy about it. There's talks about like lawsuits over IP theft. And so there's definitely a lot of blowback from this operation, first of all. And second of all, yeah, I think a lot of people are concerned that electronics can just explode now.
Yeah, and there's a couple of differences there too, like as far as equipment goes, right? So booby trapping enemy equipment that's not a new thing. I'm sure you've heard about this. Like in Vietnam, special forces teams would go in, try to locate North Vietnamese mortar munition caches and sabotage or replace them with mortars that would explode when someone attempted to fire them, right? It's a demoralizing thing, etc. But replacing a piece of civilian communication equipment, whether or not it potentially is going to end up in the hands of somebody that you want to attack, but you just let 5,000 of those out in the market, right? Those could have ended up in the hands of anybody, really. They could have been, resold or whatever. And you have absolutely no eyes on when you're triggering it. So you're going to trigger all 5,000 at once, no matter, that person's holding a baby. That person is a baby. Like, it's like you pointed out, if anyone else did something like this, we'd be calling it what it was in every, news source, which is a terror attack. If you switch the headlines from, Israelis do this to Al-Qaeda does this, it's a terror attack. So, the double standard continues to apply.
And one thing that I didn't hear any commentators mention after the attack was it got instantly normalized. So whenever Israel does it, it gets normalized, whether it's the state policy of bombing hospitals to rigging civilian devices as bombs. Now it seems like a thing people accept now because Israel does it. So I guess that's now a part of modern warfare and intelligence operations. That's like pretty scary.
It is a significant escalation too, Greg, right? Like, so the concept of like, I'm going to flood an area that I want to start collecting intelligence on. I'm going to flood that area with cell phones or cheap cell phones, right? Multiple intelligence services have done this before. I'm just going to start dumping, cheap cell phones, burner phones. I'm going to start dumping them in a local area. And especially if, that technology is relatively expensive for that area, they're going to end up in the hands of people that you probably want to listen to. That's a variation on that tactic has been used all over the place, but no one's ever been like, you know what else? I'm also going to remote detonate 5,000 of them and try to kill whoever's holding them. That's an insane escalation. But yeah, I totally agree. This stuff gets normalized within 3 articles somehow.
Yeah, and so I was talking about how that didn't necessarily change the strategic situation. Israel is clearly not going to invade because if they had that capability, they would have saved it until the invasion started to cause like insane chaos. I would say there are some people saying it was a use it or lose it situation where Hezbollah was cottoning on to the idea that something in their comms network was compromised, so they clacked it off in order to get what value they could out of it.
Yeah,
I don't necessarily subscribe to any particular theory because the performative effect is the same. Now that they've used this capability, I'd be very surprised if they had another, card up their sleeve that was comparable to this. But also, the more time that passes, the more time Hezbollah has to reevaluate their communications infrastructure and put different SOPs in place and start using different equipment, the less Israel is going to be able to exploit it.
Yeah, I agree. I do lean towards the they hit some kind of use it or lose it moment. I think that because one, their actual yield impact on the organization to me was minimal. Like you didn't really do very much with that. It's a single use attack. I guarantee everyone's going to be taking the electronics apart for everything that comes in from anywhere now. So it's not going to work. It's not going to work a second time. There's a very low reusability on these kind of things. A good example of that is the joint U.S. Israeli attack on the Iranian centrifuges, right? The cyber attack. The problem with those kind of weapons is they leave their signature behind. You can see exactly how it was executed, and that will not work a second time. And I think this is the same case. They can't do this twice. So,
right. And so where does the actual situation stand right now? A lot of people stopped paying attention to the news on the weekend. We wanted to do this episode, even though my internet is freaking horrible and I'm probably freezing. And I hope the audio is not too bad, but the video.
Your audio is good. Yeah. Just the camera every once in a while just pauses.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. So as things stand right now, here's what happened recently. We're going to listen to a CNN 3-minute roll up, and then we're going to drive into more of an analytical stance. So there was a couple of targeted assassinations of Hezbollah leaders, and there has been some more controversy. Let's check it out. So yes, Hezbollah responded last night, being Saturday night, with rocket salvos.
Volleys of medium-range rockets described as Fadi-1 and Fadi-2. That's a type of rocket we're not altogether familiar with. However, they said the targets included the Ramat David Israeli Air Base, as well as the Rafael Advanced Defense Systems facility in Haifa. Now, these appear to be the deepest strikes inside Israel since 2006. By all accounts, it doesn't appear that they hit their targets, but we are seeing video from northern Israel.
And that's significant in that 2006 was the last actual straight up shooting war they were in with each other. So this marks kind of a milestone in terms of the escalation ladder that we've been looking at.
To indicate that there has been some damage. Most of those drones and missiles have probably been intercepted in this case. Now, according to the Israeli Medical Service, at least 10 people have been admitted to hospital as a result of these 3 volleys of strikes. Now, in addition to this, Israel is striking back. So far this morning, there have been at least 60 Israeli airstrikes on targets in southern Lebanon, according to the official news agency, which also says that at least 2 people on the Lebanese side have been killed already. Now, we did hear Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, saying this morning that Israel's so-called efforts will continue against Hezbollah until the residents of northern Israel will be able to return to their homes. Since October, about 62,000 Israelis living near the border have had to flee south. That, in addition to the more than 100,000 Lebanese who have fled the border area. Now, as a result of these mounting tensions, the UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon put out a statement saying that the region is on the brink of imminent catastrophe. She stressed that no military solution will make either side safe. Now, you did mention the U.S. Embassy. Yes, it has advised U.S. nationals to leave immediately from Lebanon, and if there's in southern Lebanon, definitely to leave as soon as possible. And other American nationals should cancel all plans to travel to the United States. Now, the United States over the last 11 months has tried to ease the tensions between Hezbollah and Israel. They've been trying to work out a deal whereby Hezbollah fighters would withdraw from the border area north of the Litani River, which is about 20 kilometers north of that border. But until now, those efforts have resulted in nothing. In addition to, of course, the American efforts to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza. And really, the fact that we are in this period of intense escalation tells you something about the inability of the United States after 11 months to somehow resolve, to put an end diplomatically to the war in Gaza, which is why, in fact, Hezbollah says they are a support front supporting the Palestinians in Gaza since the war began on the 7th of October.
And I'm glad the CNN anchor brought that up, because they are acting like a support element. Like, you look at articles in Haaretz, and even they're recognizing that Hezbollah and Iran are sticking to their strategy in the Gaza war, or genocide, leaving Israel to decide what comes next. So they're essentially not falling for this escalation trap. And it signaled it will not stray from its guiding strategy in the Gaza war, supporting Hamas without plunging into all-out regional war that would implicate Iran. There was a few rocket salvos over the weekend in response to the pager attacks. But if we're using precedent as a guiding principle, Hezbollah might have to ramp stuff up because they can't appear to look weak, or at least they'll stay the course with the same amount like volley tempo or salvo tempo. But yeah, I don't see them changing their overriding strategy.
No, I don't think they will either. I don't really, in my own analysis, my own beer math, I don't see any reason they should. I agree with you. I think maintaining the amount of pressure that they've been consistently maintaining on northern Israel makes strategic sense for them. And I do love how we continue to pretend that Netanyahu has any interest in a ceasefire at all. That's hilarious. Clearly not. Like, the Israeli escalation here, is for probably one of its singular purposes is to derail negotiations. But yeah, I don't see Hezbollah taking the bait anytime soon.
Well, one of the talking points I'm seeing on what I call Israeli Hezbollah now is the term I'm seeing is de-escalation through escalation, where Israel say they're escalating in order to de-escalate with Hezbollah, like make Hezbollah back down completely.
Do you remember a little concept during GWAT called preemptive war? Little neocon concept called preemptive war. Yeah.
We go to war to prevent war. We go to war to prevent bigger war. And now, speaking, I wanted to put this in the front end of the episode because that's when most people watch, and we did promise to look at some of the footage. So they're using different ordnance, and we're going to show a picture of the ordnance. It's strikingly different from that which people have been seeing since the start of the onslaught on Gaza. And Travis, as a former artillery officer who knows a lot more about ordnance than I do, is going to tell us about what they're shooting into or dropping into southern Lebanon. So if you guys aren't watching and you're just listening, I'm going to explain it to you. So dark exterior, night, southern Lebanon, everything's dark, and then the sky is lit by a massive explosion. First of all, you see the blast and the inferno from in the distance. You don't hear the sound yet because light travels faster than sound, but here comes the shockwave. You can see the shockwave blossoming out into the clouds. It looks reminiscent of a nuclear bomb. And you can see in the distance a distinctive mushroom cloud shape, and everything goes dark except for the explosion in the outline and the flame burst itself. And yeah, everyone's been asking what that is. So I think we both know what that is. You want to get into it?
Yeah, I mean, again, we don't know 100% for sure, but it sure hell of a lot looks a hell of a lot like a thermobaric weapon, or there's a couple names for them. Thermobaric is one. Fuel air bomb or fuel air explosive. FAE is actually fuel air explosive is kind of what they're generally technically grouped under. But yeah, that certainly looks like a thermobaric weapon to me.
So what exactly is that?
So thermobaric weapons operate on a kind of a different explosive profile. So when you talk about conventional explosives, what's composition B, these things that are in most of our artillery shells, most of modern military bombs, actually have a mix inside them. They have a mix of the two things that are needed, or two of the three things that are needed for an explosion. Right? They have the fuel, what's going to burn, and they have an oxidizer. Now, in most explosives, those are mixed already, and then you need the third piece, which is an ignition source, and that's your fuse or whatever it is on your bomb or on your artillery shell. Fuel air explosives or fuel air bombs or thermobarics, which is what they're generally called, they are just fuel. And then what they have is they have essentially something along the lines of a bursting charge. So you just think of like a big thing full of flammable something. And then what happens is there's an initial explosion near the target that sprays that out into the air, disperses it rapidly in an aerosol form, and then it's ignited. And so the oxygen in the air acts as the oxidizer, oxygen. It is the oxidizer. Whereas normally that would be mixed in an explosive. They use the air for that. Well, what happens then is you get a 500-pound bomb, say, of conventional explosive versus a 500-pound fuel air weapon. The fuel air weapon has a much higher yield because it contains no oxidizer. Everything in it is fuel. It's dispersed out into the air and then it's ignited. And that's why you kind of get a two explosion function with fuel air weapons, and they actually last a little bit longer. Whereas, if you watch a normal artillery shell or normal bomb, it's an immediate explosion and that's it. The fuel air weapon, it's different. You're going to see an initial charge go off, a dispersal, and then a rapid ignition and combustion. And that's how they function. They've been around at least since Vietnam. The U.S. still manufactures a couple of them, two bomb variants, one, I believe, Hellfire missile variant. And functionally, I think there's a couple historical examples that can tell you how they function. Have you ever seen news articles about a flour mill having a massive explosion? And you're like, how does a place that manufactures cooking flour, like bread flour, how does that explode? Well, flour is flammable and it's not particularly dangerous, right, when you have a sack of it in your kitchen. But if you take a bunch of particulate flour and disperse it through the air in a place and ignite that, congratulations, that's a fuel air explosive. It's literally the same exact principle. Occasionally happens in sawmills. You've got a lot of sawdust in the air. Any place where you have a lot of particulate flammable matter dispersed widely in an oxygen environment, which is normal air, and you ignite that under right circumstances, you can cause a fuel air explosion. And so a fuel air bomb, a thermobaric bomb, is just a bomb that uses that same principle in a military capacity with more stuff on a bigger scale.
Yeah. So we, as SOP, had one thermobaric grenade
Yeah, that's right. We do have
per
grenades.
squad. We had one per squad, and it had to do with caves in Afghanistan. So, can you take this a step further and say what the function
Yeah,
might
so
be?
thermobarics normal use. They're actually not super commonly used, but you did see them, in Afghanistan where Greg was. When you've got cave networks, they're used in trench lines, and one of the reasons they're used is because of the way they explode, where they fill the air with the fuel and then are ignited. They aren't normal defenses. Things like sandbags and trench lines and holes and caves aren't nearly as good as defending the occupants against them as they are against conventional explosives. If I drop an artillery shell next to your trench, I might blow one of your eardrums out, but as long as you're down in the trench, you're not going to get hit with shrapnel. The sand and the sandbags and material is going to block a good chunk of the blast wave. But if I drop a thermobaric weapon on the same spot, that fuel air mixture is going to propagate the entire area, inside the cave, inside the trench, etc. And the explosion is going to come from all around you. And that's why they're so much more lethal, especially, again, because they ignore normal defenses and barriers.
So I think it's given, again, this is still supposition, armchair general stuff, because we're in America, we're not on the ground, we're not seeing it. But based off, if we accept that this is a thermobaric weapon, which I think is very likely, given the amount of tunnel systems in southern Lebanon, based off the profile of the explosion, the flame trail lasted a lot longer than a JDAM. We've all seen JDAMs drop and stuff like that. That was in the air for quite a long time. Do you think this signals an escalation in Israeli targeting procedures?
It definitely signals that they're using some heavier stuff now.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. One of the things that makes me think that the likelihood of it being a thermobaric weapon increases is where it was used, right? Mm-hmm. So using I wouldn't put anything past them. Using this in a city would be catastrophic. Using it in a trench line is actually like the quote unquote normal military use. Trench or cave network would be the normal quote unquote normal military use of a weapon like that. The other piece is, like you said, conventional explosives, conventional bombs don't make flames like that. You drop a 500-pound JDAM, you mostly see smoke and the effects of shrapnel. You very rarely see very much of a flame flash, Hollywood-style looking explosion. You rarely see that unless it hits something and caused a secondary explosion of like a fuel depot or something like that. So
yeah, and looking at the image, I mean, it was far off, but I didn't see any secondary explosion.
No, I didn't. And I saw a single blast wave, which you called out in that video. And then, the second piece too is the only other thing that makes big chunks of flames is incendiary weapons, which Israel does use, but they use white phosphorus, which doesn't look like that. So that looks like a thermobaric weapon to me. Yeah. Again, can't prove it, but that's certainly what it looks like.
Yeah. So that is,
as far as an escalation, Greg, I don't. It definitely looks like they're actually for once targeting military units. Instead of villagers. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah. And it looks like they're actually, for once, if using the correct ammunition.
Yeah.
But then again, we know that JDAMs, even if they have the what's commonly called the bunker buster package on, they wouldn't be able to do anything to Hezbollah's tunnels, which are more hardened and fortified than Hamas's. So
yeah, no, thermobarics are really some of the most effective stuff when it comes to like tunnel and defensive positions. They beat just sheer explosive poundage. They beat it 1-for-1 any day as far as field goes.
Fuel air weapons. Okay, so now, of course, around all these targeted strikes that we're seeing in southern Lebanon, there is a massive IDF propaganda push. I like to check in with that every once in a while and see what they're saying about Hezbollah, and then we'll get into the more political analysis now that we've talked about the military stuff.
Hezbollah has been planning to carry out another October 7th.
Already a bold claim. There's nothing. Okay, we've already established how that hasn't been Hezbollah's strategy since the beginning. But, it's important to check in with propagandists.
They call it the Galilee Conquest Plan. This attack includes the invasion of communities of northern Israel. The commander in charge of planning and executing this deadly attack plan was Ibrahim Akil.
So that was the guy, Ibrahim Akil was the guy who was killed in the strike this weekend.
He was just eliminated.
Also, there was initial reports speak of considerable collateral damage because it looks like they JDAM'd a residential building inside Beirut.
In a targeted strike in Beirut, along with senior commanders of the Operations Division and the Radwan unit.
I like how they say he was killed in a targeted assassination in Beirut while literally showing B-roll of freaking mass, like 1,000-pound JDAMs.
Yeah.
That's kind of insane.
Those are just city block wrecking bombs. So
awesome idea. Thank you.
Since 2004, he has served as the head of Hezbollah's operations unit, in which he was responsible for Hezbollah's bombing attacks, anti-tank missile attacks, and other military fields. Akil was responsible for the anti-tank missile attack towards the Avivim post in 2019 in northern Israel, the terror attack at the Megiddo junction in 2023, and the infiltration attempts of Hezbollah terrorists into Israeli territory to murder and kill Israelis in the current war. Hezbollah has committed many terrorist attacks with impunity, and whose leaders operate openly under the guise of Iran's protection. The blood of thousands of American, French, German, Lebanese, and Israeli civilians has soaked the hands of these terrorist leaders. This is why we are determined to stop them.
Okay,
Greg, I want to point out the B-roll that they showed when, right as they were saying, have carried out many terrorist attacks, was an armored Humvee getting hit by something, and it's like, guys, uniformed military forces, you're allowed to strike them with impunity. That's never a terror attack. That's just war. So
because the most basic definition, if we're discussing how the tactics of how terror attacks are brought out, the reason it's called terror attacks is because they intentionally target civilians to bring about a political response for the entity that is responsible for those civilians.
Yeah, absolutely. Shooting. If I'm wearing a uniform, sitting in a Humvee, shooting at me with anything is not a terror attack. It's something else.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you've talked about this at length of having to explain that to your guys. Over in Iraq.
The terrorists shot at us, guys. Unless they were shooting at a bus full of civilians behind us, those aren't terrorists. Those are insurgents, guerrilla fighters. You can call them, you can call them all kinds of things, but terrorist is not. It's not one of those things.
Yeah. So. But of course, we've seen since the beginning, the West and its allies likes to basically be the one who determines what kind of violence is acceptable and what kind of violence is not. So, real quick, before we move on, you said that the Israeli propagandists went to the same school as...
They're so bad. They're so bad. They're so ham-fisted with some of their stuff. Like that one at least had some production value. Sometimes their production value is terrible too, which is even funnier in 2024. But yeah, they're so ham-fisted and their lies are so blatant. I was joking that it's like they went to the same propaganda school as Baghdad Bob. So I don't know if you remember the Iraqi propaganda minister. Like there's no X in Baghdad, and there'd be like Marines on a tank rolling behind him, like in the shot. But yeah, they're nearly as bad.
They're almost as bad as Baghdad Bob. And just because I actually kind of don't know this, was Baghdad Bob one of the like a propagandist that was collaborating with the U.S. presence there?
No, he was an official ministry propagandist, like under Saddam. Yeah, he was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So he was saying like the Americans actually haven't invaded, and then a truck full of
exactly. He was like famous for saying like, "There's no Americans here. The Americans haven't crossed the border. There's no Americans here." And it's like there's CNN's rolling live footage of armor units in the city. Like, yeah.
So yeah, not quite as bad as Baghdad Bob, but almost as bad. So, all right, moving on. So like, what is the Biden administration doing? But before I go into that, actually, I don't think an invasion is going to happen yet because, of course, they don't want to do that. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But also, I wanted to bring up that Netanyahu is about to go speak in New York, and it'd be highly irregular for the premier of a nation to go overseas while a massive invasion begins.
Yeah, doesn't he have a couple cases against him too? I don't know, man. I don't know. I'd be wary of international travel if I was that guy.
Yeah. So with the war of attrition between Israel and Hezbollah ramping up, the possibility of a precipice of an escalation regionally, which I don't really subscribe to. I don't think Travis does either. U.S. policymakers are caught in this dilemma that they've been caught in since October. On one side, preventing an escalation has been America's interest and policy priority since October. The Biden administration has invested military, intelligence, and diplomatic capital into averting such a crisis by both deterring Iran and Hezbollah, and heavily supporting Israel with arms, munitions, and diplomatic cover, yet warning it of the repercussions. Don't do it, you'll regret it. And then, of course, Israel asks with impunity. So on the other side, the U.S. is cognizant, because of their influence within our own government, of Israel's predicament in the face of what Haaretz calls unprovoked, continuous barrage of Hezbollah missiles, rockets, and drones, and the total evacuation of the north, which has displaced nearly 100,000 people and effectively ruined the economy. Again, the economics is part of the whole strategic overview, and Israel's not doing well in that regard. This is why the U.S. sees these recent Israeli attacks, one can surmise, on Beirut as a possible strategic tipping point. I would argue that the pager attacks and the elimination of Hezbollah commanders is more tactical in nature. It doesn't really change what we would call like the facts on the ground.
Yeah, or even like PR based. Like they know that they've lost a ton of face as far as their combat capabilities, their intelligence capabilities. I think, you know, this is a hey, look what Mossad can still do. Look how Mossad can still touch you, right? Like I think they're trying to recover some of their like infallibility, omnipotence that they used to have.
Well, yeah. And you know, that's something that's always kept Israel safe.
Yeah.
One of the things, because it's propped up by a bunch of myths, an entire legendarium that stretch from Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, which is a myth. It's apartheid, so it's by definition not. To we have one of the most badass, competent militaries in the world, and the Mossad is omniscient. They know and see all. And October 7th dispelled that. Like, whether you subscribe to conspiracy theories about that or not, the performative effect is the same. Their ability to deter people because of these communal myths that they've had, that's been developed by generations of propaganda, it's kind of gone. So what they needed to do, and because also they haven't achieved any of their operational goals in Gaza, they haven't defeated Hamas, they haven't destroyed all the tunnels, they haven't recovered all the hostages, and they're not going to until there's a ceasefire at least. They have to do something. And so this pager attack, while impressive on an operational level, arguably I'd say it is, I think it will have more blowback in the long run than any short-term strategic benefits they draw, or tactical benefits that they draw from it right now. But yes, this operation was a way to get that je ne sais quoi friggin' deterrence back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious too, the like opportunity wasted, right? Because if I can get my hands on 5,000 communication devices that I know are going to be, or I think are going to be in the hands of people that I'm trying to, do network analysis and target and stuff like that, wouldn't it have been much more valuable to put, GPS pingers in there, or, some other replication device or something like that? But no, we can just put 2 pounds of plastic explosive in there and see how many people's hands we can blow off. I don't know. It just seems so much more short-sighted, right? If I've got hands on your comms devices and I can get you to use them, that's a long-term information game. That's like, I don't know.
Well,
I know the Mossad know where you live, Greg, but I'm not convinced they know what Hezbollah is doing.
They definitely know where I live, but even though I just moved, they definitely know where I live. But I will say that it just seems like Israel, in its current incarnation, in its late-stage settler colonial mindset, they will always choose short-term violence over any like long-term strategy. So
100%.
From an American point of view, I would say that a low-intensity war in the region is not desirable because of its built-in escalation mechanism. However, given the alternative, I believe the Biden administration could live with it as long as it was somewhat confined. But, a chain reaction that could escalate 45 days before a presidential election is not something the administration is looking forward to.
And I don't think it's the question. To me, the question is, if it happens, would the administration do anything about it? It's what would the administration do when Israel starts losing it? Because that to me, that's what's going to happen. And so when they start getting rolled up, if they cross the border and try to repeat 2006, and a repeat of 2006 starts to happen, wherein they are getting materially attrited and rolled up, and they're already facing the losses that they've suffered in Gaza. What does the U.S. administration do when Israel starts losing? Because that's what's going to happen if they did that, and that's one of the reasons I don't think they will. But But
Well,
yeah, you understand, you know what I'm saying? Like, what will the administration do? Will the administration let them lose? How badly will it let them lose? You know?
well, if you recall the 2006 war, what happened? Israel rolled in with their tanks, lost a bunch to asymmetrical tactics, bombed the crap out of Beirut and the Bekaa Valley, and then there was a massive Western information push to portray an image of victory for Israel and an image of victory for Hezbollah. That's not something they can replicate again because we're all so plugged into what's happening now.
Yeah. They're under a microscope this time. It's not going to fly. And, you know, as we've discussed before, there was no military, nobody in NATO thought Israel won that war. Everybody in NATO knew damn well that Hezbollah kicked the crap out of them. So, yeah. But I don't even think you're going to get away with it in normal media this time.
Yeah, and, you know, this paradigm of kind of this semi-hot war between Israel and Hezbollah has endured based off of three conventional premises. Like, first, neither Israel or Hezbollah are interested in a major war, given the almost inevitable devastation that would be inflicted on both. Beirut would be hit incredibly hard, and then Hezbollah would, within a couple days, overwhelm the Iron Dome's munitions stockpiles, and then there goes your water desalination facilities, there goes your power plants, there goes your runways on your military bases, and Tel Aviv would get hit, Haifa would be shut down, and again, Beirut would be absolutely devastated. So that's one, mutually assured destruction, essentially. The second is that mutual deterrence governs actions and dictates restraints, so neither side has any incentive to cross any red lines of military skirmishes. And the third principle is like somehow this state of affairs is somehow tolerable and acceptable. And it may be to Hezbollah to keep the pressure on and take some hits because they've proven, but it's definitely not to Israel. Because
yeah, you nailed it. You nailed it. One population on one side of that border can handle that. The other one absolutely cannot. You know, Netanyahu's head would be on a stick within days.
Yeah, because there's almost 100,000, like the entire north of Israel, that entire population core is completely alienated from the government. Like they are not happy campers.
You're also going to have the additional military losses. So you've already got conscription problems now. You've got manpower problems now. I already have that. That's already an issue. You've already got people refusing to serve now. You've got officers in writing, at least, defecting or making, former retired generals making, very damaging public statements. That you have all that now. So now escalate it with a north border fight against Hezbollah, who is much better equipped than Hamas is, and hasn't had nearly the same pressure on them that Hamas have had. And what do you think is going to happen domestically? It's going to be 10x worse than what they're facing domestically right now.
Yeah, but they can't not. Israel can't. Well, okay, so let me reframe this a little bit. So what Israel wants to do, what their biggest goal is to somehow disentangle Hezbollah and Hamas and strike a different deal with Hezbollah that wouldn't require a ceasefire in Gaza.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what the pager attack was going for. That's kind of what these target assassinations of Hezbollah leaders are going for, not just to degrade their CIC capabilities, but also to get them to start thinking on a different level. Hezbollah cannot afford to do that, though, because if they would lose all credibility forever if they just abandon Hamas now.
Yep, totally agree.
So that's not. There's kind of like no. What's interesting about this is based off the perspectives of each actor, to include the U.S., which is basically impotent. So whatever. Based off from the perspective of each actor, there's like no off ramp to this.
No, you were talking about Netanyahu going to the UN. That actually surprises me because it's such a hostile audience, right? In general, him going to the U.S. Congress didn't surprise me at all. He's bought 98% of the room.
Yeah.
So that's a friendly audience. I'm kind of surprised that he's going to the UN, especially Israel has two tacks. One is which what the UN says doesn't matter, and I guess I'm going anyway, but they all hate you, so have a good time.
It's going to be really interesting to watch that. I'm not sure because they had to replace the Israeli ambassador to the UN because he was so embarrassing. And then the other guy's just a crybaby. And now Netanyahu's going to do what? Go to the UN and cry more?
Yeah, to what? Like, I don't understand the audience. I don't understand the optics, really. I don't. But
is he going for sound bites to like send back to his own people?
I imagine that's what it's got to be, right? And he knows he's going to get. He knows he's going to get gentle coverage in U.S. news and UK news and stuff like that, right? They'll make him look good, or they won't cover the responses that happen. But as far as the UN body, that's what it's got to be. It's just a backdrop, because he gives absolutely zero fucks what the UN body itself says. As long as the US doesn't seem to care, he doesn't have to care, because Dad doesn't care. So
yeah, well, Dad said I get more bombs. So in terms of US policy, right?
Although I'm not convinced I know who's Dad anymore, by the way, in that relationship. But yeah,
that's true. It's very odd and it's very unconventional. But first of all, like, anyone who thinks that escalation and limited are controllable constructs in this concept is delusional. Like, once this opens up, it's going to freaking open up, and no one's going to know where it goes. But for U.S. policymakers, there are 3 distinct time frames that they have to look at. The 45 days until election on November 5th. So that's one time frame they have in terms of implementing policy, and a ceasefire is not going to happen by then. Then you have the transition period between November 6th and Inauguration Day, right? And then January 20th, 2025 and onward. This frame is obviously different depending on who is elected and going forward. So a potential deterioration in the next days and weeks makes only the first time frame relevant as of now. So the U.S. seems out of fresh and creative ideas other than to sternly and repeatedly warn against escalation that can spiral out of control very quickly. So they're only worried about getting this contained until election, I think. And then afterwards, we might see a policy shift.
I wouldn't. I agree. I wouldn't expect anything actual to happen. I don't think they're not going to get a ceasefire before the election. There's no way in hell that's going to happen, because again, I'm not convinced Netanyahu has any interest in it at all. And escalations are a policy nightmare. Because I also agree they're not going to stop. If it escalates past a certain point, it will continue to roll downhill. But Harris has doubled down on that backing, and so that's not a corner that she can get out of, right? I mean, what else? Let me phrase it this way: what else does Israel have to do before the Democrats stop backing them?
I personally think
another genocide. Like, they need another country to do a genocide against, and then it'll work. Or like, what's the line? So
I think something everybody should come to expect is, once Harris gets in office, there will be no more talk about Palestine. Like, when she solidifies her hold, like, it's full, no breaks. Let's go, Israel. That's my prediction.
Yep.
She's only paying lip service to Palestine. There, far too many Palestinian civilians have been killed. But after election, that's gone. She's gonna be like, "Fuck y'all."
No
more cops,
more drones, more drone strikes.
Yeah. So, like, we know that liberals or neoliberal warlords are a thing from Obama and from Clinton. So I wouldn't expect
before we catch shit. Trump won't do anything either. It's also the same.
No. Yeah. But there's an there is a idea or a hope going around that she will change things, within levels. Like, once we just win the election, she'll like start working on Palestine. No, she won't. So one thing,
that's someone who doesn't understand how leverage works and how after your voting is done, you don't have any anymore. But
yeah. So one thing I did want to mention that I totally forgot because I didn't put it in the show notes, that one of the reasons for the strikes, for the pager attacks, which were an act of terror, which actually has freaked out. I've been talking to people in Beirut, the entire population. They're like, what's going to explode? Because also, we know solar panels, for some reason, exploded. I think they probably just do you think a DDoS attack could overheat the battery? No?
Well, the panels themselves, unless they're like of some weird design, like some little notebook one or something like that, but any of the like industrial or house size ones, the batteries aren't co-located with the panels themselves. If they meant like any power system that's got that kind of battery, potentially, you could potentially make a lithium ion battery catch on fire. But they didn't do any of that. They didn't go by overloading. They packed explosives in circuitry. So I guess it's a question of, did they intercept anything else? But
well, why would you do that with solar panels?
Solar panel. I don't know, because they're not. People aren't usually like. It's not like we sit on them. You know what I mean? It's not like you have breakfast on your solar panels. Like, they're not usually next to you, so that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of reports, and apparently, like, that's the word on the street. But
yeah,
I think it's mostly. But anyways, because it was an act of terror, because it has like a massive psychological impact, and people were like Hezbollah bots. Well, there were bots. There's actually people behind these accounts were trolling. It's like, oh, looks like Stoker just found out what psychological warfare was. I was like, no, I think you are just learning that acts of terrorism are inherently psychological. All right, buddy. So the entire
I won't do it because they're never, these kind of dipshits are never worth our time. But it's like, bro, psychological warfare has an entire doctrinal definition, even by NATO standards. And guess what's not in there, right? Pager terror attacks. That's not psychological warfare. That's fucking terrorism, right?
Yeah.
So you don't get to paint it with a like legitimate or doctrinally legitimate function. You know, psychological warfare is where if I record something insulting about your mother and I play it on a speaker stack outside your house for 3 weeks on end until you shoot at me. You know, that's not
so,
saying that, guys.
And the last piece that I want to bring into everyone's attention, there's this idea within Israel that if they're able to pressure the civilian population enough, that they will rise up against Hezbollah. And this is something that we've been seeing, trying to stir up tensions between other armed factions in southern Lebanon, the population itself, to destabilize Hezbollah, and then the IDF can invade. So we're seeing op-eds that are coming out just like an exhausted Lebanon can't mount civil disobedience against Hezbollah. Lebanon is in the midst of a crisis on many levels, which is not untrue. The inflation is insane. They got a whole bunch of crap going on. And Israel's threats to send it to the Stone Age are met with rolled eyes, as many Lebanese feel they are already there. This is inherently problematic subheading, but the Lebanese people have risen up before, but Hezbollah is too well armed and too well supported to be challenged. One of the things they don't understand, it seems, in Israeli media is that Israel is also too well hated for them to be like, no, Hezbollah. So there is this idea behind these terror attacks, too, that it will force the Lebanese people or compel the Lebanese people to, in order to make it stop, they will take the fight to Hezbollah. And based off every definition that I came across when I was like in Ranger Bat going to more like intelligence stuff, I reading about like the purpose behind terrorism is to get that exact thing to happen, to destabilize a governmental entity so much and to create such an element of fear, like that government can't protect you, so that you end up attacking that government.
Yeah, plus with against these kinds of organizations, it works so poorly. Like it's just not. It's not a functional method. You know, you think 50 years of history would have taught them that, but they didn't learn anything. It's funny too. It's like why can't they rise up against Hezbollah? Well, because they're too well supported. Yeah, dick, internally.
Yeah, it's like I know you guys keep calling Hezbollah a terrorist organization,
They're not viewed that way in a lot of places. Yeah,
they're not. They're viewed as a resistance front and a form of and a governmental party. Of course, there's plenty of people who hate Hezbollah in Lebanon, but if you're looking for a civil war to happen in order to solve your problem for you, you can dream on.
Also, yeah, and also hitting shit in Beirut, where all factions, all ethnic religious backgrounds that exist in Lebanon, they all live there. Everyone lives in Beirut together, and when you start bombing that, you're hitting everybody. So I don't know.
So we got a few more minutes left. Final thoughts.
Haaretz occasionally write something, and you're like, oh wow, that's like very well reasoned and like pretty well reported. And they write some shit like this, and you're like, okay.
Well, it's the op-ed section. It's kind of like the Wild West.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, but even their really reasonable reporting, it's still written by like liberal Zionists.
Yeah.
With the exception of like Elon Pape and a couple other guys, but it's still like liberal Zionists who operate under the presumption that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization and they're attacking us for no reason.
So even though written by the least terrible Zionist.
Yeah, but still totally like.
Yeah.
Oh, we shouldn't do that to the Palestinians, but like, it's happening.
Like I know a guy. He's the nicest white supremacist I know. So
yeah, and we just have to say before we end, there is one more element to the overall strategic situation, and that is this, guys. Frigging Al Jazeera and Ramallah getting raided by the IDF in West Bank in order to shut down eyes and reporting on the ongoing Operation Summer Camps, which is spearheaded by bulldozers and mass displacement. So here's footage. This was, I think, first posted by Mariam Barghouti. She is one of our favorite journalists in West Bank. So the Israeli military is raiding downtown Ramallah, broke into Al Jazeera's offices and ordered its closure for 45 days by military order. So they're shutting down Al Jazeera for 45 days. This happened around 3:20 a.m. local. So this was Saturday night for us. And this is Al Jazeera Arabic. So I'm going to be reading the subtitles for you. The Israeli army is not allowing the bureau chief Walid Omari and senior correspondent Guevara Bouderi from leaving the premises of their cars and are obstructing them. This is military. This is a military against a press office. They have already banned from covering in Jerusalem and beyond, confining them to Ramallah and West Bank. And now even that is not allowed. And Israeli forces shut down the office, kicked the bureau chief and all staff out in downtown Ramallah, fired live ammunition in the vicinity, and ripped posters of killed journalist Shireen, the Palestinian American. Her picture was ripped down. She was killed a few years ago in West Bank, and they don't want any coverage. So they're using the escalation with Hezbollah and the ongoing war in Gaza to take eyes off West Bank in order to shut down press offices, which is super democratic for the
fascists don't do that, right? Fascists never send the army to shut down journalists, right? That's not.
Yeah. So just wanted to draw attention to that. We can probably see an escalation of violence.
Every time I see those guys standing up that side office, I just want to walk up to them so bad and be like, "Why aren't you in Gaza, snowflake? Like, what's up? Who's your uncle that you got this duty? Your duty was to go raid Al Jazeera and Ramallah."
So that's a great point. Fascists never send in the military to shut down press offices.
Totally reasonable democratic operation.
So we've got Gaza. There's going to be no ceasefire. They're still fighting over the Philadelphia corridor, and they're still fighting in Khan Yunis. The North's heating up. West Bank. There's not really. I mean, there are resistance forces in West Bank, but they're not really developed because they're living under heavy surveillance and military occupation. So they're not really going to be able to put up any of the same amount of resistance that Hamas has. And I really wouldn't expect too much. There's just going to be mass demolitions, extrajudicial killings in West Bank. And yeah, they're going to use this cover by the media coverage in the North to expand operations and violence in the West Bank. And so final predictions. What do you think we're looking at this week? This is completely just supposition.
I don't think they change. I don't think they change anything. Ceasefire moves nowhere. It's definitely not before he goes to the UN to talk. But the position on the ground is going to remain static. Maybe the continual exchange of the same low grade stuff that's been going on the Hezbollah border as well. And then I think the bulldozer violence, settler violence, I think that's just going to increase. No one's stopping them. The U.S. is doing nothing. Their handlers, their suppliers are doing absolutely nothing to make them change their behavior. So why would they?
Right. And I would add that
the absolute, forgive my French, the absolute giant testicles on the people that are going and standing between the settlers and the Palestinians and those villages, who, by the way, just are some of the biggest balls people on the activist side of the house that I've ever seen, standing between settlers and the IDF and Palestinian farms. They're the only ones that are even remotely slowing this like settler violence stuff. The U.S. is doing absolutely dick. So
yeah, absolutely dick. And so I don't know. We're going to keep saying what we've said since October.
Yeah.
No regional escalation. The prospect of mutually assured destruction remains in place. The U.S. doesn't want this to happen 45 days before an election. And the IDF just can't do it. They just can't do it. So we might see a further redeployment of tanks and infantry to the north, more as a deterrence than an actual like invasion, like an actual spearhead front. But aside from that, yep, we're probably going to move on to others unless something crazy happens. We're probably going to move on to other topics because despite the flashiness of this pager operation, the security situation has not changed.
Nope.
So.
We'll see. You'll see absolutely zero change in Hezbollah operations, deployments, or strikes from this. Like I said, I don't believe it will have any significant effect at all, other than the PR one that they were going for in the fucked up way that they do.
And all right, y'all. So that's where we're coming at this from. I hope you enjoyed the thermobaric demonstration. That is a new weapon system that you might not know about. It's kind of sad that a large chunk of the civilian population, because of this genocidal war, is having to learn about these different types of ordinances just to be informed citizens. So cheers, y'all. It's Sunday, and we will see you sometime next Tuesday or Wednesday for an episode on something. So cheers, y'all. Hope to see you then.